We're in Leviticus chapter 24. So friends, 24 out of 27 chapters. We're almost through the book of Leviticus. It's just really flown by. Just seeing. Nobody celebrated when I said we were almost done, so that's always good. That's always good. Hey, the book of Leviticus has been, honestly, for me, a lot richer than I expected it to be. You read through Leviticus, and it can be dry, but when you kind of study and dig in, there's really a lot more to it. And something I keep pointing out is how many things in the New Testament make more sense when we know really the origin of them in the Old Testament, and Leviticus is full of those kind of things. And we'll see a couple of those tonight. In chapter 24, we have a couple of things to do with the tabernacle and the priestly worship. That's what Leviticus is mostly about. Study of a situation where a law was broken and the people of Israel enact justice. And that's a lot of what we've seen throughout Leviticus too, is legal stuff. Here's the laws and here's the punishment for breaking these laws. So we find a lot of that in the book of Leviticus. And like I said, we have an example of one of those laws, and we'll look at how they handle that. The first thing we're going to look at tonight is two things. First of all, a commandment about the bread and a commandment about the light and the bread inside the tabernacle. Remember, the tabernacle is that temporary, portable temple. You could take it down and put it back up as the Israelites would move throughout the wilderness and the desert. Inside, it was special things inside there. It was made of special material, and inside, all the elements and implements were made of special material. This is where the priests would minister. Those are going to be mentioned too, so I'll remind you. So if you were to go into the tabernacle, which always faced east, right? So we'd be going in that way. No, sorry, that way, excuse me. That way. So imagine you're looking the way I'm looking. And then you'd go in as you open that veil, which you couldn't go in, and I couldn't go in, by the way, because we weren't Levites. But as we would go in, if we were able to go in, you would walk in, and first you'd see on the left, you'd see that big golden lampstand, the menorah, we'd call it today. Menorah is just Hebrew for lamp. So that's what that big golden lampstand was, 7 branches. Each of those branches had olive blossoms on it, so it's kind of like a tree. There'd be 7 lamps on it. On the right would be the table for the showbread. So the bread would be laid out there, and then directly in front of us there'd be an altar for incense, and then behind that would be a big veil, and behind that veil would be the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was. And the Ark of the Covenant in that area could only be accessed one time a year by one person, Aaron in this case, and then the subsequent high priest after Aaron's dead. So that's the light and the bread we're going to talk about tonight. That's those things. So as we read that, kind of keep those things in mind. Here's what it says. The Lord spoke to Moses. Command the Israelites to bring you pure oil from crushed olives for the light in order to keep the lamps burning regularly. Aaron is to tend it continually from evening until morning before the Lord, until the curtain of the testimony in the tent of meeting, outside the curtain of the testimony in the tent of meeting. This is a permanent statute throughout your generations. He must continually tend the lamps on the pure gold lampstand in the Lord's presence. Take fine flour and bake it into 12 loaves. Each loaf is to be made with 4 quarts. Arrange them in 2 rows, 6 to a row, on a pure golden table before the Lord. Place pure frankincense near each row so it may serve as a memorial portion for the bread and a fire offering to the Lord. The bread is to be set up before the Lord every Sabbath day as a permanent covenant obligation on the part of the Israelites. It belongs to Aaron and his sons, who are to eat it in a holy place, for it is the holiest portion for him from the fire offering to the Lord. This is a permanent rule. So the command there is for the Israelites, first of all, to bring the oil of pure olive oil to the tabernacle, to the priest, so that Aaron, the high priest, can tend that lamp. So the idea is that those lamps would be lit all the time. They'd be continually burning in the tabernacle, this tent of meeting, and so the light would never go out. Somebody was always home, right? God had never abandoned his people, and that light symbolized that is be the only light. There's no windows, there's no other sources of light in this area, so the menorah would provide that light, but also would be symbolic of that presence of the Lord there amongst his people. And this is that big golden lampstand. Remember, we've talked about it at length. Exodus chapter 25 describes its origin and how it was to be made. and how they finish it in a very elaborate, beautiful thing. Now, whenever you see that lampstand, it's eventually going to be incorporated into the temple when Solomon builds the temple. And Solomon's going to add on to it. He's going to add, as a matter of fact, there's going to be 10 altogether, right? So 5 on each side inside the temple as you would go in. So he's going to have that one and add on even more. And of course, it's part of those temple implements that gets taken away, probably by the Babylonians. In 2 Chronicles, you see a couple things. First of all, the Pharaoh, king of Egypt, comes in and he ransacks the temple and takes all the temple's treasuries, and they add back to it. So he could have taken it along with the Ark of the Covenant. That's possible. But the Ark of the Covenant specifically is mentioned later on in the book of 2 Chronicles when Josiah's reign was taking place. So it was about 300 years later. So probably the Babylonian Nebuchadnezzar, when he comes in and ransacks Jerusalem and carries off the Israelites, he probably takes this. And it gets melted down and it's lost to history. Although some of those implements come back eventually. When Ezra, Nehemiah, Zerubbabel, they rebuild the temple, some of those implements come back from Babylon back to the temple so they can reestablish the worship. In Jesus' time, they had a new one. So probably Herod built it. In Jesus' time, they had a bigger temple than Zerubbabel's temple. Herod came in and rebuilt up the temple. They didn't have the Ark of the Covenant, but they had all these remanufactured elements like the golden lampstand. As a matter of fact, if you ever go to Rome, there's an area in Rome called the Forum. And the Forum has all these ruins of these government buildings that were from, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. And it's neat. You see all these old columns laying on the ground and different things. And one of the artifacts there, the ruins that's still there, is called the Arch of Titus. The Arch of Titus is just kind of a big square box-looking thing, but it's an arch in the middle. And the Arch of the Titus was constructed in AD 81 to celebrate when Titus ransacked Judea and Jerusalem in AD 70. And on that arch, you can see a group of men carrying away a huge golden lampstand, like this one mentioned here. So if you ever go to Italy, and I don't necessarily recommend that you do, but if you ever do, it's a short walk from the Colosseum. You can see this arch, and you'll go and you'll notice that menorah. You say, that's a weird place for a menorah. But it's a celebration of when a Roman emperor sacked the temple and carried off one of these golden lampstands. That's certainly a recreation of this one that we see them working with here in the book of Leviticus. And the command simply here is just keep it burning. It should always be burning. We got to have lots of olive oil. Now, notice he says, command the Israelites to bring the olive oil. That's interesting to me a little bit because if you think about it, at this time in the history of Israel, how are they eating bread every single day? I'll give you a hint. They go out and they collect it off the ground. Manna, that's right. Nobody said it. That's okay. Speak up. Manna, right? So the way they are being provided for in their daily needs is by a flake that God brings that they have to go out and collect, and they make it into their daily bread. That's how the Israelites are provided for. And yet, God commands the Israelites to provide this olive oil. Can't God provide his own olive oil? He's providing bread. Why can't God just make it rain olive oil or something like that? Why does he say, Aaron, command the Israelites to bring the olive? Well, there's always a connection between God's people and God's house, right? There's always this connection between the people and worship. I mean, the Levites could go out and find their own sacrifices and bring them into the house, but that's not the commandment. The commandment is the people bring the sacrifices to the house of God, to the tabernacle, and then the Levites would minister there and sacrifice it. The same thing is true about this olive oil, and the same thing is true about the fine flour that'll be used in the bread. It is to be brought by the people. There's a connection. God has this continual connection with the people and worship. Worship of God is not altogether separate from the people. The Levites do the worship, they do the sacrifices, but the people always have a connection. You see that continually throughout the age of the tabernacle and the temple, the ministry of the Levites. That's a common theme. Now, when we think about New Testament thoughts on this golden lampstand, and the ministry there. Of course, Jesus said, and we've pointed this out before, Jesus said, I am the light of the world. He might have had this kind of lamp in mind, a lamp that never went out. Of course, Jesus' light never fails to shine. But also, and I wanted to point this out because as we've talked about the lampstand, I've never actually mentioned this, but I think this maybe gives us a little bit of help as we get to the New Testament, especially one of the most difficult books to understand in the New Testament. As a matter of fact, if I were to go around and give us a little study or a little survey on what's the most difficult book to understand in the New Testament, most of you, if you had a chance to think about it, right now you're drawing a blank because I'm asking you, but if you really had a chance to think about it, you'd say the book of Revelation. That's right. The book of Revelation. It's interesting that there's lampstands all throughout the book of Revelation, right? That's a common theme in the book of Revelation, these lamps. And it seems funny in my mind. Why are we talking about all these lamps in the book of Revelation? Let me give you an example. Primarily the 7 lampstands in chapter 1 through 3 refers to these churches. So John, the Revelator, is in the Spirit on the Lord's day. He says, this is chapter 1, verse 10. And he says, write on a scroll what you see and send it to the 7 churches. And then it names all the 7 churches. You know them, Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, so on and so forth. Then he says, down in verse 12, says, I turned and saw the voice who spoke to me, and I saw 7 golden lampstands, and one among the lampstands was like a son of man. So the picture is Jesus there among 7 golden lampstands. And it's going to go on to describe this one like the Son of Man. And he's got 7 stars in his left hand, and his hair is blazing white, and his eyes are like a fiery furnace, and his words are like rushing water, and there's a double-edged sword coming out of his mouth. And John the Revelator in this vision, he falls down to his face, and Jesus comes over and comforts him and explains to him the 7 stars in his left hand are the 7 angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. So, in Revelation, this picture of these 7 lampstands represents these 7 churches that he addresses in chapters 1 through 3. And so, like I say, why is this church represented by a lamp? I mean, of all the things you could use to represent a church, he uses a lamp. Seems silly to me. Frankly, I'm not a big fan of lamps. You know, like click, click, click lamps? Like desk lamps? My wife loves lamps. I hate lamps. Because it's so much easier to just flick off a light switch. It's the most inefficient way of turning on light in your house. Isn't that true? You have to walk over, and you never can, you always have to do this, right? You can never, it's a side note. I'm working through it. Any other, am I the only one? Is that just me? I'm the only one. That's fine. Just for the recording, I'll just say that my wife said, you're the only one. All right. But this is not that kind of lamp. These are going to be lamps where they would light them with they'd be olive lamps, oil lamps. Why does Jesus picture these churches as lamps? Well, when you have this Old Testament imagery in your mind from the book of Leviticus, if you have tabernacle and temple imagery in your mind, when you go to the New Testament and you read about these 7 golden lampstands, then it's not that weird. It's not as foreign to our minds. It's something kind of normal, biblical. And perhaps I could even maybe stretch and say just a little bit that the churches here, or every church, every true gospel-centered church, Bible-preaching church, then, like a lamp in the tabernacle, illuminates the presence of God and serves to highlight the ministry of God and to God. And so, I think the Old Testament imagery of this golden lampstand highlights the New Testament reality of the churches, and that's maybe why in the Revelation they are pictured as lampstands. At least makes it less weird to think about. And I won't talk as much about bread. I just had a lot of thoughts on lampstand today, but bread in verse 5 through 9, you know, he says, this says show bread, so you'd walk in, there'd always be 2 things in the tabernacle and in the temple. There'd be light and bread. Jesus, of course, would call himself the bread of life, right? So Jesus picks up on these things in some of his I am statements in the book of John. I am the light of the world. I am the bread of life. By the way, it's fresh bread. It's never stale bread. It's never moldy bread. And bread, food, all throughout the Bible, whenever you see people eating together, it's a symbol of fellowship, right? Like we've fellowshipped around a meal and tables tonight. And you might have just sat at a table by yourself and didn't talk to anybody, but I hope you didn't do that. I hope you had some people at your table, and I love it when people sit at your table that you don't know, and you get to kind of meet them and talk, and you just have to get over the awkwardness. So what do you do? Where are you from? What's your name? All that. You get to know each other a little bit better, and that's what meals are supposed to do, and that's a picture of this food, God's provision for the Israelites through manna and other means, and then also God's fellowship with his people. That's what this bread, this ongoing, fresh, weekly renewed fellowship is supposed to symbolize. And then we get down to this case study, this story. This is something that really happened. It's not just an example. If it does happen, this is a story. So we have kind of a break in all this legal material, all these rules and regulations, all these requirements of the people, and tells us about something that took place. And it's in verse 10. It says this, now the son of an Israelite mother and an Egyptian father. That's important, I think, for the story. Among the Israelites, a fight broke out in the camp between the Israelite woman's son and an Israelite man. So you have a man who is half Israelite, half Egyptian. Makes sense. They just came out of Egypt. And as a matter of fact, in the Exodus, we're told that they came out as a mixed multitude. Remember hearing that word? Mixed multitude. So some of the Egyptians went out with them. And then you have certain situations like this where they'd be part Israelite, part Egyptian, and so that takes place. This young man gets in a fight with an Israelite in the camp. That's what happens. In verse 11, it says, he cursed and blasphemed the name. Cursed and blasphemed the name. Whenever you hear the name in the Old Testament, especially here, what name are we referring to? The name of God, yeah. So God's proper name. And we understand that to be pronounced probably like this, Yahweh. Okay? A mispronunciation of that would be like Jehovah. If you've heard that name, Jehovah, that's kind of how it was translated from the English to the German, or from the Greek to the German back to English. It got a little bit squirrely in there, and they pronounced it Jehovah, but probably the best way to pronounce that, we're not for sure, but probably the best way is Yahweh. It's God's proper name. Okay? When God confronts Moses with the burning bush, who do I say sent me? This is the name. God gives his proper name. And so during this fight, this man, this half Israelite, half Egyptian guy, curses, so probably directed at this individual, meant to insult and make him angry, because that's what you do in a fight, right? You just try to inflict pain on the other person through your fists and through your words and whatever means you might be able, maybe your feet, maybe your teeth, whatever you're fighting with. And he curses God and blasphemes the name of God. Now, then it says, and they brought him to Moses. This is going to tell you about his mother here. It says his mother's name was Shelomith, a daughter of Debri, the tribe of Dan. Those little details, whenever they tell you the actual person's name and who they related to and what tribe they were a part of, that lets you know that this is not a made-up story. This is not a hypothetical situation like, hey, if this were to happen. No, this is a really real thing that really took place. These are real people that lived on earth and breathed air and all that. And they take him to Moses, and they put him in custody until the Lord's decision could be made clear to them. So they arrest him. They lock him up, and they take him to Moses, and Moses locks him up until a decision can be made about what to do with him. Now, this is a legal conundrum. See, they know what to do when an Israelite commits blasphemy. They've already been told. What they don't know what to do is when a foreigner commits blasphemy. When a part Israelite, part foreigner commits blasphemy, that seems to be at issue here. The issue at hand is, does our law apply to people who live amongst us that aren't really part of us or part us? Obviously, this guy must have worshipped Egyptian gods. He had no problem cursing this Israelite god. As a matter of fact, if it was his own god, he probably wouldn't have cursed his own god in order to insult someone else. So he probably wasn't a worshiper of God, probably wasn't a real Israelite in this sense. Now, the fact that he was half Egyptian doesn't mean he wasn't a real Israelite, because you could become an Israelite. In our minds, a lot of times we think if a person's a Jewish person or an Israelite, that refers to their ethnicity only. But that's not entirely true. A person could become an Israelite. Okay, so a few examples. You have Ruth the Moabite, who becomes an Israelite. Okay, and you have a couple other examples too throughout the Bible, and you could become one. So you just have to forsake your old culture, forsake your old God, and adopt the culture and the religious practices and the worship of the Israelites, and you were an Israelite. So that doesn't mean he was an Israelite. The problem here is this guy definitely wasn't one, and what do we do with people? And so there's not a lynch mob. They don't go out and kill him right away. They don't beat him up or anything like that. They apprehend him, take him to Moses, and they say, what do we do, Moses? Lead us in the right way. And then Moses doesn't even seem to know, because it said they put him in custody until the Lord's decision could be made clear. So Moses is going to ask God, what do we do with this guy? Moses doesn't even seem to know what they should do. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, verse 14. Bring the one who has cursed to the outside of the camp, and have all who heard him lay their hands on his head. Then have the whole community stone him. And tell the Israelites, if anyone curses his God, he will bear the consequence of his sin. Whoever blasphemes the name of the Lord must be put to death. The whole community is to stone him. If he blasphemes the name, he is to be put to death, whether the resident alien or the native. So that is a person who lives among us, who is an alien, or the native born. So that would be a full-blooded Israelite. Doesn't matter. If you curse the name of God, if you blaspheme the name of the Lord, it's the death penalty, and that's prescribed. Notice all the witnesses, all those who heard him, they're going to put their hands on his head. They're going to testify against him. Remember, if you, in a capital punishment case in Israel, if you testified falsely against somebody, then you were going to get the punishment they would have gotten. So if you testified against somebody falsely in a death penalty case, and it was proven that you were lying, you would be killed instead of them. And so these people were the witnesses. On a testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter must be established. And so they come and they all put their hand on this man as a testimony against him. That's what's going to happen, and they're going to stone him to death. That is the penalty for blasphemy. Now, what's blasphemy? That may be a good thing to mention just for a minute. Blasphemy essentially is just saying anything bad about God. That's a real simple definition. A little bit more specific is if you say something that's not true about God that is true, or you say something that's not true about God is true, right? So God is not something that he is, or that he is something that he's not. All right? And so you think, well, that seems harsh, right? Just words, just saying words get a person this kind of punishment. Well, I'll give you an example. In our society, words can get you punished in our society as well. We have laws against hate speech, for example. We have laws against defamation, like slander and libel. So we actually have laws, even though we believe in freedom of speech in our country, we still have penalty for certain words that you might speak. And these would be words against the most holy God, the only one and true God, the one who has come and resided among his people, who's rescued his people out of slavery and bondage, and is going to take them into their own land. He's going to provide for their every need. I mean, this Egyptian man, part Egyptian guy, was eating every day food that God provided, and yet he cursed the name of this God. And so he gets the due punishment. And God says the due punishment is death. Death. Now, the Israelites will be so careful from now on with the name of God that most of them, even to this day, will not even pronounce the name of God, because they don't want to be guilty of cursing it, blaspheming. They don't want to be guilty of using it in vain. So they'll use some kind of a substitute word instead of saying God's proper name. Like I pronounced it a minute ago, Yahweh. That's to the best of our ability, that is how it is pronounced. But we don't even know exactly, because the ancient Hebrew didn't have any vowels. It was primarily a spoken language. When they wrote it down, people who spoke it wrote it so they knew how to pronounce these words. Later on, so that wouldn't be lost totally, some other people came and put little symbols around the consonants. And those little symbols, if you ever notice the little symbols around Hebrew words, those are where the vowel sounds go. And so as you read Hebrew, by the way, from right to left instead of left to right, you just know, you see that little symbol above those two consonants, that's how you insert a vowel sound there. But when it came to the name of God, that proper name, those people did not include any vowel sounds on the name of God. It's 4 consonants. The tetragrammaton is what we call it. And so we don't actually know exactly how to pronounce it. The way I say we think it's pronounced Yahweh is because many other Hebrew words have part of that name in it. Like, for example, Joshua and some of these other names, and it'll be like the Lord saves, okay? So that's what that name means. So we know that part of God's name is in that name, and so we take that little part out, and we go, okay, that must be how you say this part of God's name. So the Israelites had such reverence for God's name that they wouldn't even pronounce it, and most Jewish people won't even try to pronounce God's proper name even to this day, so that they're not liable of misusing it or blaspheming it. Even to this point, many of them will not write it down. They won't even write it down, just in case they misuse his name somehow. And I know Jewish people that will not write even God. Like even on like Facebook in their posts, when they want to say something about God, they will put like G_D. They won't even use this very, very general term, God, because they don't want to be guilty of blaspheming or misusing God's name. Now, I don't think we have to be that careful. I don't think even me pronouncing it right now in order to help you understand and to teach God's words, I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all, but God was very serious and is very serious about his name to the point of death. And when you think about it in the New Testament, why was Jesus crucified?